Foremost, thank you so much for agreeing to this conversation. Now, I kept thinking while reading your book that Victoria Nash's tale is somehow wrapped up around the peach, which becomes this almost mythical fruit. It's like the golden apples sought by Hercules in a way. Now, why did you choose this particular taste for your story?
Okay, well, hello, and thank you for that question. Yes, the peaches and the peach farm become a very important symbol in my book. Victoria Nash, as you know, is a rather naive and sad character when the novel opens. She's alone. She's the only woman in a house full of men. And I needed something to hold that family together. This family has gone through a lot of grief and a lot of loss and a lot of difficulties. And I needed there to be something that was beautiful to all of them. And even though there's been a lot of problems in the family, Victoria Nash says that the peaches on her farm are the quote is the last beautiful thing. And so a lot of the trajectory of the book is Victoria trying to save her family's ancestral peach farm. And, I use the peaches in the book as a symbol of being able to grow against the odds, being able to be resilient in new soil. And I think that one of the things that your listeners might be interested in knowing is that growing peaches in Colorado is a very, very difficult thing. We do grow the most beautiful, sweet, lovely peaches in Colorado, but it is very difficult to grow them. They're very susceptible to frost or temperature changes. We are growing them at a higher elevation. And because any Colorado peach is a bit of a miracle in a way.
Yes.
And certainly to grow a peach farm in Iola, Colorado, which was even more difficult. I wanted them, as you say, to almost be this miracle fruit, this miraculous fruit, but also be a symbol of being able to grow against the odds. And so I try to carry that all the way through the novel for Victoria.
Well, you definitely succeeded. I also love the fact that the narrative actually moves to and fro, encompassing past and present and future. It's a very special treatment of time that reminds the reader in a way of the way in which water and memory, this movement somehow connects them. Now, why was it important? Why was this movement important to you?
Oh, well, that's very interesting, the idea of the way time moves and the way that a river moves. I like that comparison. Victoria Nash's story, the novel opens in 1948 when she's 17 years old. And then the novel follows her until 1971. And in that time, we as readers watch her go through many tragedies and challenges and difficult decisions. There's some reflecting back on the past and her childhood and where, where she has come in order to get to that point where the book opens. But I think of Victoria's journey as being very much like the journey of a river. For her growth, there are no straight lines for her. It's not about getting, being 17 years old and then just growing and getting from point A to point B. The river in the book, similar to the peaches, is also a powerful metaphor. When you think about the way in which rivers flow, their paths are curved, their trajectory is unpredictable. In order to move forward as a river, you have to push against obstacle and go up and over and carve new banks. And I think that that's a very nice metaphor for life. And it's certainly true for Victoria Nash's journey. For her, in many ways, her growth is two steps forward and then one step back. Every time we see Victoria become able to overcome a difficult circumstance, she finds herself in another difficult circumstance. And I think that for a lot of us, that's how our lives flow. And we just have to meet each one of those challenges and obstacles when they come our way. And so, yeah, time and growth for her in the novel very much flows like a river. It is a curvy and windy path, but one that you have to just keep moving forward in. And that is what Victoria does.
Yes, I absolutely love the fact that the narrative, the way in which the story is told, actually mirrors her fate, and I think it's a very seductive element of your writing. Now, the voice of nature is also felt throughout the narrative as the most powerful, most majestic, I would say, forces. And it seemed to me that it is only when she is truly aligned with the greater forces of nature does the heroine truly become herself. What was the most challenging part for you in writing such a powerful voice?
Well, what I will say is the easiest part for me of writing this book was the representation of the wilderness and the wild places and the wild landscapes and the forces that they had on Victoria's life. The reason that was the easiest for me is that, I live high in the Colorado Rockies, and I spend a lot of my time out in the wilderness. I'm a big mountain climber and hiker and camper and backpacker and skier. We ice climb and rock climb. Our life high in the Colorado Rockies is very immersed in the natural world, mine and my family's. And I've spent a lifetime observing the details of that wild landscape. I've spent a lifetime learning the lessons that wilderness teaches me. For me, wilderness is both very empowering and also very humbling. And so I wanted to bring all of that into Victoria's journey and how she learns how to be her best self. And so I actually found that part of the book the most natural and the easiest for me to write, because it mirrors my own journey in a lot of ways, all of the things that I've learned from wild places. And I think that you're right that Victoria finds some of her greatest strength in her connection with the land, and some of her greatest lessons come from the lessons that she learns when she's out in the wilderness. And I hope that all of the readers of the book find some inspiration for themselves in that way. I hope readers come away from the book with a deeper sense of the power and importance of nature and wild places in our lives.
This is a beautiful, beautiful answer. Thank you so much for it. Now, labeling people and discriminating violently against them is another very important theme of your book. Ethnic identity, but also mental health and difference of any type, in a way, are subject to discrimination. And Victoria herself is more than once a victim of other people's, let's say, narrow views of the world. Yet with all the pain that she endures and the hate around her, she never hardens. What keeps her on her path?
Well, I knew that I needed to not shy away from the difficulties and the horrors of both sexism and racism, especially of the era, as the novel opens in 1948. Unfortunately, that era, that both of those forces were very powerful at that time. And yet I would also argue that both of those forces have continued and are still in many ways alive today. And so I wanted to tell a story about displacement in the American West. I wanted to tell the story of what happened to the people of Iola. And I knew I couldn't tell that story without also acknowledging the painful and horrific displacement and treatment of the indigenous people of the American West. And so I wanted to bring in the character of Wilson Moon. And so by doing that, by bringing in Victoria as a woman in a house full of men who have no understanding of who she is, and who really just see her in many ways as a house servant, and within the context of the men in her family, Victoria really has to work extra hard to find her strength. So we have Victoria being, there's prejudice against Victoria as a woman. Certainly there's horrific prejudice against Wilson Moon as a Native American character. And yet I wanted to turn the novel as a whole toward hope. I wanted I wanted Victoria to be able to discover who she is. I wanted the novel to acknowledge the pain of racism and the pain of prejudice. And like I said, I did not want to shy away from the horrors of that. But I also wanted to show that there can be healing afterwards if people are strong enough and they work hard enough. And my two characters of Wilson Moon and Victoria Nash, I wanted them all the way through the book to be two characters who can be above all of that, who can be transcendent of prejudice, who can come together and see each other as just two beautiful human beings, completely outside of that inherited prejudice and that inherited cultural bias that they may have had. I wanted to show in those two characters that it's absolutely possible to come together with another human being and not see any of the prejudices that could keep them apart. And hopefully in that way, the novel deals with prejudice in an honest way, but it also shows that there is an alternative, that we also just can love each other and not be prejudiced by those biases.
Mothers are absent from the story up to a certain point. They are very present at every level of their children functioning in the world. And I was literally struck by the beautiful subtlety and by the refinement of these absent mothers who are woven in the very texture of the narrative. How difficult is it to write shadows inside a story?
Shadows. Oh, I love that. Thank you for seeing that, because I'm a mom and I have two children, and being a mother has been such an essential part of my life. And I also have a wonderful mother, and I've had wonderful grandmothers. And so in my own personal life, motherhood is very present. And I think because I value that so much, I've thought very deeply about a mother's journey. I've thought very deeply about what it would be like to not have that in my life. And so I think you're right. Because it's mattered so much to me, I think my imagination went more to those shadowed places of what would it be like for me? What would it be like if I did not have a mother to care for me and guide me? What would it be if I did not have my children? What would that quest be like for me? I think because my children and my mother and my grandmothers are so important in my life, I wanted to create a character who had those elements in her life only in shadow, and see what she then did with that. And I think what I found is that absence of a mother, absence of a child can be just as prominent and just as strong in one's life as presence of a mother and presence of a child. And so living in that sort of shadow of not having those very crucial things really defines so much of who Victoria is in terms of what she's trying to reclaim in her life. There's a lot of loss in the book. And one of the things that it asks is, when there is loss, what can and cannot be reclaimed? And for Victoria, I think her journey becomes about reclaiming something essential about motherhood and something essential about the child that she seeks, I guess I'll say.
What part does the fateful twist play in the narrative? Because this is a coming of age story in a way, but it is also a story about the way in which life can change in a second, the way in which somebody's world can be turned upside down.
Yeah, I've always been really fascinated by that. I think so frequently as humans, we're going along day to day, we think we know where we're going. We have a plan. And it's such a common human experience that plan can be suddenly altered in such a profound way. Sometimes that change, that altering can be a positive and amazing and wonderful thing. Sometimes it can be the most tragic and horrific thing. But I've always been fascinated by that in the human experience. And so it plays a role in my novel, I think, to a level that I wasn't even aware of. I think that there was a certain amount of conscious application of that idea in my book, and then other times where it came up without my intention, mostly because I think that I am so fascinated by it. And I find it both beautiful and disturbing that could be true for any of our lives at any moment. And so, the book opens, the very first lines of chapter 1 are Wilson Moon and Victoria Nash just happen upon each other as both are walking to town. And that happenstance, that fateful moment, alters the course of both of their lives. And then at different points in the book, I weave in different moments where that happenstance occurs again. It certainly happens later in the book with the character of Inga. And so I wanted to just lay that bare for the reader to say, this is how life evolves. We want to believe that our choices, and of course our choices matter, and Victoria has very difficult choices in the book. Our choices do matter. Our intentions for ourselves do matter. But we must be ready for the best of intentions to go awry, for the most unplanned circumstances of our lives to be the thing that ends up most defining who we are and most defining where we're going. I really wanted to highlight that in the book because I really just think that it is a fundamental aspect of our lives.
Exactly. And in a way, it continues the metaphor. One must always be ready to grow peaches in a new soil.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Yeah.
And again, and carve a new bank as a river, rivers.
Exactly.
Both of those metaphors, yes, I think are involved in that idea of you just never know what's coming, and you have to be ready. You have to be strong enough to be resilient against whatever is coming your way. And I really believe that you can be.
I also absolutely love the way in which you wrote the transformation of the father-daughter relationship, because it is practically in the second part of the novel that the father actually becomes present in the story. And I was wondering whether this was one of the suggestions you wanted to make, that we sometimes live our lives without truly being there, and that people do not really know each other within a family until they actually choose to see and be seen.
Yes. The father, I wanted to create him very carefully because I wanted to show that he was a bit rough around the edges. I wanted to show that he was basically a good, kind man, and he loved his daughter, but he also was so wounded by grief. And he also is a man of his era. And I think that he is also a man of his culture, which for me, the culture here that he comes from is the ranching and farming communities of Colorado. And that is the ancestry that I come from. I've been here in Colorado 5 generations of my family. My children are 6th generation here in the state of Colorado in Western United States. And there is a certain culture for the men. I don't want to stereotype or make it too general, but generally speaking, ranchers and farmers, they just are tough, humble, hardworking men who get up every day and they do what needs to be done, but they're not necessarily as comfortable with their emotions, perhaps, than a family might prefer. And so I wanted to show that in Victoria Nash's father is a man who gets up every day and he works hard for his family and he carries forth even though he feels broken by grief. But he can't show the love for his daughter that he actually has. And so, as you say, they have that relationship. I think they've always had it. And it's only after tragedy and tremendous change, when Victoria comes back to the farm, that in a rather brief way, but I think in a very profound way, just Victoria and her father spend that time together. And she realizes in his own quiet and subtle way how much he loves her. And I really wanted to be sure to bring that in, because I think he is in many ways a typical man of that era and of that circumstance and of that culture, who actually has far more depth of heart than one would know just by looking at the surface. And I think that a relationship in the novel is rather subtle, but I think it's very important for Victoria. It's the only family member she has to love. And once he's gone, she has to figure out how to go forward on her own.
Absolutely. What part does the potential reader play in making the story whole?
Well, I ask the readers, I think, to, I hope that the reader loves Victoria the way that I love Victoria. I worked on this novel for many, many years. And so I was able to sit with and get to know Victoria Nash very, very deeply, and all the characters in the book, really. But what I would like a reader, a potential reader, to know about the book and to participate in the book is to know that all of the characters in the book are complicated characters who in many ways are sort of products, not necessarily victims, but definitely products of their circumstances, products of their culture and of their historical moment. And that each one of them holds these complexities that I think all human beings do. And I think a certain level of patience and insight and understanding of that these are complicated people who are all just kind of trying to make their way in the world. And in that way, I wanted to sort of make a comment that that is true for all of us. All of us carry grief, all of us carry loss, all of us inherit cultural biases. All of us are doing our best, I hope, to try to live our best lives and move forward. But it's complicated and it's difficult and it's not easy. And so I would hope that the reader will try to come to my novel and come to my characters and their stories with as much empathy as possible, because I would love to have more empathy for one another as human beings. And I hope there's a lot of empathy and hope and just a lot of generosity toward the complexity of the human experience in my book.
Well, as a reader who loves Victoria, I humbly share your hope that everybody loves her just the same. And thank you once again for this absolutely wonderful character and story. Now, my last question to you would be, regarding the fact that you are a teacher of literature and you live in this area of amazing natural beauty, what did writing this wonderful novel teach you?
Oh, well, thank you for that question. It taught me a lot. It taught me a lot personally about perseverance, because I chipped away at this novel little by little by little over many years, well over 10 years. At the time, I was teaching full time and raising my children, and I didn't have a lot of time in my life for creativity, but I had to insist upon it, but just in little bits here and there. And so I know that it taught me a lot about the same type of determination and resilience that we see in Victoria in the book. It also taught me to follow your dreams, because I set out to be a writer as a child and as a university student, and also even a graduate student at university. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but then I ended up being a teacher for almost 30 years, a university professor, and I loved being a teacher. But I knew I wanted to eventually get back around to my original dream for myself, which is to be a writer. And so the fact that I was able to do this, able to finish the book, able to get it out in the world. I mean, for me, the fact that it is with you there in Romania, I am so amazed. And so for me, it very much was an experiment in following your dreams. And I hope that if there are any other writers out there who are listening or who also have a dream for themselves to write a book and finish a book and tell a story and get it in the world, I hope that my journey will inspire you to really stick with it and really follow your dreams, because having this book in the world and having it in your hands is an absolute dream come true for me. And so I guess that I've learned that dreams are possible.
Ms. Read, thank you so much for this interview and for this splendid piece of fiction. Thank you.
Thank you. What an honor and a joy to be able to be with you and to see my book in your hands. Thank you so very much.